So, good afternoon. My name is Anto Budiarjo. Welcome to Monday Live. No, that's not what I... welcome to this session on the coalition. I'll be moderating, but the folks here are going to be doing most of the content and delivery and talking. This is a session on Coalition for Smarter Buildings. So what is the Coalition for Smarter Buildings? Before we do that, let me just talk about what we're gonna the agenda for today. We'll talk about why we this group created this coalition, why there is a need, because there are a lot of coalitions, a lot of alliances and groups, and that's a really good point to start. We want to talk about a thing called the Smarter Stack, which is created as a sort of a joint venture between Monday Live and the coalition. And then we want to talk about the Division 2525 specifications, workforce, and a little bit about project template. And the most important thing is we really want to have a conversation about you being part of this. This is not a one-way thing. Really want your involvement. Let's get on with it. So first, a little bit about Monday Live. Monday Live is a I guess you would call it a Zoomcast. It's a webinar that we do every Monday at 3 o'clock Eastern. We started doing this at the beginning of the pandemic because we just wanted to chat between ourselves, and then we turned it into a public forum. Basically, there's about 12 of us that is on the panel of Monday Live. We just chit-chat about the issues related to how we can move the industry forward to make buildings smarter. It sounds very vague and things, but it's really quite a good conversation. We take different topics. So one week we would talk about sustainability, another week or another month we would talk about digital twins, and then we talk about go-to-market strategies and all sorts of different things. So it's kind of the common theme is how do we what is the future of smarter buildings? And we have Jim is part of the Monday Live, John is part of the Monday Live here. Who else do we have in the room? Bill is part of the Monday Live. Anybody else here? I think there's a few others that are here in Vegas, but not in this room. And sort of a common thread on the Monday Live that we've been holding for nearly 2 years now, actually, is how to move things forward. And at one point, about a year ago, Rick, with his colleague Pete, who's not here, came to us and said, we'd like to create a coalition, a DC-based, not policy, not lobbying thing, but a DC-based kind of organization to help move this forward, especially in anticipation of some interesting things happening at the federal government level. So I'm going to let Rick talk about that in a minute. He really wanted to get our involvement in it. So we've been talking about that, and cut a long story short, after about 3 or 4 months of that, talking back and forth, the coalition was created. When was it created? In June-ish?
June.
So that's kind of the history of the coalition. We're trying to do quite a lot of things to change the industry, and I thought before we get deep into each of the subjects, I'll sort of show this. This is kind of a very vague sort of progress timeline of where we are. We started obviously last year. There's 4 projects that we're talking about here. One is the stack, meaning the Smarter Stack. We've created that, and these little, this is the Smarter Stack that we'll talk about in a minute, and you'll actually see these stickers here that we're putting on people. So that's kind of the creation of the Smarter Stack is done, as it were. But what we want to do is really wanted to get for it to be used as widely as possible. So we want to talk about that. We are working on this the specification that we call Div 2525. We'll talk about that. That's really in the starting phase. We're probably about 20% into that particular project. So that's where we are. It's kind of the second line. I hope people can see that. There's also another key part of the coalition, which is to help workforce development in terms of training and curricula development. That's probably about 50% done, and Melissa's going to be talking about that today. And then there's an idea about creating a project template, which is really a sort of a notion of creating a template where smarter building technologies can actually be done much, much easier using a template rather than having to start everything, do everything from scratch every time. Right? So as you see there, we haven't really started other than just some of the concepts and ideas, and we hope to do that this year. So one of the things that we did at the coalition is to figure out what it is that we're going to do, and the way we kind of structured it is that we came up with these 5 pillars of action. And I think what I'll do is I'm going to hand it over to my colleagues here and talk about each one of those. You want to? I kind of want to talk about interoperability, but maybe Jim and John can talk about analytics first. Sure. And sort of the rationale behind that.
Well, I'm going to make a suggestion here if I can. I really think that an overview of this. Yeah.
Actually, do we need the microphone? Actually?
Yeah, I think so.
Couldn't find a switch, but.
I was going to suggest a brief introduction to the stack, because what we've accomplished with that is to find a way to plug in the different topics in relation to each other, analytics being one of them and others. And I think so much of what we're trying to do, that's helped clarify it and helped other people understand what we're doing. So I don't know if you can jump ahead. I think talking a little bit about the stack would be a great thing to start with. That's my suggestion.
Great idea.
As you can tell, we did not pre-plan every bit.
Did you
way off script already?
I can do it.
Sure. I'll offer comments on it. Bring a picture.
Okay. So the smarter stack. Right. So the idea of the smarter stack is to create a way of modeling, creating a framework to model all of the different pieces of a smarter building. Right? We all know there are things like analytics and there's data, there's cybersecurity, there's things, but how do they all relate to each other? There's lots of different products, right? But how do they relate to each other when you actually implement it? So if you think about making buildings smarter, you basically have some users who either occupy, operate, own, or otherwise consume the building. These are kind of people, right? And then at the bottom there's buildings, right? We know what they are, right? Whatever type of buildings. And we know that there's smarts in the middle of it, right? The smarts is the technology that is being delivered to users to enable the users to consume the buildings in a smart way, okay? But that doesn't really help, right? Because we kind of know all of that. And so what we said is that, okay, so in the smarts layer of it, there's really two things. There's two main things. There's, first of all, there's the apps, the applications that make it smarter, analytics, management tools, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's the data, the all-important data. And then there's the buildings as well. And what we said is that what are the needs of these 4 layers? All right, because these 4 layers represent people, companies, products, technologies. What are the needs? Users basically just needs buildings to be operated safely, healthily, and to provide productive environments. Okay, apps need to be delivered to users, and apps also need to consume data. It's basically what apps do, right? Data needs to be gathered, secured, normalized in a way so that it can be consumed. Again, pretty simple. And buildings, they just need to be there to be able to be consumed, to be able to be occupied by occupants. But what we said is that this space is a lot more subtle and a lot more complex. And in reality, there's not just one type of users. We basically said that there are actually 2. There are those people that are more interested in the outcomes of the buildings. So this could be building owners or sort of managers of building, or managers of a shop, for example, or a teacher in a school, or actual people that are actually consuming a building, going in and buying a pair of shoes from the shop or whatever. There are those people that are concerned with the purpose, the outcomes. We call it purpose. And then there are people that are really involved in the operations of the building. If we just talk about users, we mix these two up. Right, so that was actually quite a big. Do you want to comment on that? Because that was a big
so,
right?
The whole idea in business and product development is who's it for, right? And just saying users doesn't at all answer it, because the people running the building, technicians, the building engineers, totally different needs than the management level may want a portfolio view of higher level information. So it was really key to start breaking this down. I'll just comment a little bit on, my perception of the motivation is there's so much, we're seeing at the show here, all this new technology, right? And let's assume every bit of it is good, but now put yourself in the position of a building owner. It's a tsunami, right? And there may be a great sensor that can solve a lot of problems, right? Where does that fit in this stack of needs? And then there's companies talking about trying to solve every layer of it, right? And so we felt, even for our own self, where does this fit? How would this help somebody? And then we said, wait a minute, this would help the people who run buildings, people looking to procure. In my business, one of the things I've learned is, if you can get with a customer and say, what's one of your biggest challenges in looking at intelligent building technologies, to say, we're overwhelmed, we can't figure it out, we can't even understand it, right? So this whole tool is a way to just, can we describe where it fits, whose it serves, what it serves above, what it needs below, right? And like you said, breaking down users into two classes it may seem obvious now, but that was a key step in
And at the bottom, on the building level, again, there's the building, there's the physical building itself, the concrete, steel, and actually, equipment, pieces of metal. And then there are the systems that actually run the buildings, the control system, the automation systems, security systems, etc. Again, that's subtle, but that's a big difference that we wanted to highlight. And then the most important one is that the smarts is really where there's a lot of complication and potential confusion. So we said there's really 4 layers there. There's 4 things that's going on that we really need to understand. Do you want to go through them?
Sure. So, how does it get delivered to the end users, right? So the whole idea of delivery, right? How do we deliver this technology to somebody? That's part of what an owner would need to figure out, and part of what those of us who are professionals trying to sell this stuff to building owners need to be able to convey to people, right? And then there are the applications that you can get your hand around that. I've got an app to do whatever, greenhouse gas conversion, analytics, whatever, right? But then how do those apps work? Well, there's a layer of how is data get exchanged, right? Exchange, different than where did that data come from? How is it stored? How is it governed, right? So it turns out that when you look at the smarts piece, you saw that there were these 4 elements of it, right? That could be mapped in to help people better understand where a specific solution fit, right?
Also,
again, think about
things like middleware and sort of standards, the haystack stuff. It's all about exchanging, making sure data flows. It's not about the data itself.
Right. Yeah, that really helped, there. And then now I've got a great new piece of hardware that does X. Where does it fit, and how would it serve its data up through the stack so that the end user would get the supposed benefit?
So that's kind of breaking it up. So if you put it all together, you get these 8 layers, which is what makes up the stack. Purpose at the top, operations, the users again, how it gets delivered, the apps, the exchange to make sure all the data gets to the right places, the right applications, the data, how that's governed, the systems and the physical, right? So that's everything. And basically that is the smarter stack.
Then we were done.
Yeah.
No, we said, wow, wait a minute, this looks like we figured something out.
Yeah.
So now let's go try and do some use cases. Let's put a product, a technology, a service offering against it. And then we spend a couple of months inviting people to come to Monday Live and presenting examples, et cetera. So
one more step before we got there is that How many of you sort of follow Simon Sinek? You know him, and his book Start With Why, right? Just the whole thing, the whole sort of notion about, especially in technology, we tend to focus on the what, right? The technology part of it, the pieces, the products, right? But really, you really need to start with why are you doing this, right? Why are you even thinking about implementing technology? So really, the why is that it's very difficult to see on here. This says why up here, right? The purpose is the why. If you don't have that, then why do anything? So that's kind of, it maps exactly to what Sinek talks about. And impossible to read, but basically the operations and delivery layers are the how the stuff gets consumed, how the technology gets consumed, both by the user and by the vendors. And then everything else below is the what. Okay. So how do we use this? We use it as a backdrop. Basically, if I wanted to tell you about product X, if I just put the product X there, you know what it is. It's an app. It's an application of some sort. You know, we don't know at this point what application it is. That takes a different level. And if Jim wants to talk about technology, he puts it in the data layer. We know what that's all about. It's all data, technology about data. And you can also use that to communicate what a particular brand, particular product. You want to do this one?
Well, you can put them there, but then you have to answer, how do they interact? Where do they get their data from? How are they going to deliver results? How are they going to be delivered? And so you end up with some models. So I'm hoping you get a few of these here, because I think the more we go through. And so we say, hey, look, really the industry's been dominated by vertically integrated BS. It's supposed to do it all. It has the sensors, the controllers, the graphics, the program, all of that. So it fills those lines of the stack. There's still the question about who's going to operate it. Might be in-house people, and of course the physical building. But that's kind of the way, this is the way things have been in the past, right? Vertically integrated BS covers all those stacks. But why this is so important is that's not the way the world's going, right? We have apps and products and stuff that only do one layer, or only excel in one layer. So keep going. So there you go. So next, now we break that down, right? What does a vertically integrated BS offering address possibly, right? HVAC and control. It might include cloud. It might include open ADR for demand response. It might include analytics. And then there's the delivery, which is system integrator, master system integrator, managed service provider, right? Those are all different ways that products are being delivered to the market, right? Different than 20 years ago when it was, totally vertically integrated by one vendor. That's it. That's what you got, right? And then on the right-hand side, are other examples, more general examples of things that, single pane of glass, IAQ as an app, right? Middleware as a way to connect and exchange. And then, where's the data going to be hosted, on premise, on the cloud? How do we deal with other systems, security, et cetera? And we started seeing you can map virtually any intelligent technology, any intelligent building technologies can be mapped into this. So we're going down the road and we're going, hey, there's something here. Of course, it's still us just talking internally at this time.
Yeah. And this is where technology is headed, right? Componentizing the pieces and making sure they work with each other. That's kind of, if you look at the internet and IT generally, that's how it works. Maybe not the same words as we use, but that's how it works. And that enables scalability, that enables openness, and owners being able to pick and choose the right solutions for them. So this is kind of the model we're moving from the vertically integrated to this model where everything's all broken up. Right? So some examples, and these are just sort of, it takes like 3 seconds to get. So here's some examples, some more examples. AI, where does AI fit? It's an application, right? Clever applications, great, but it's an application. Where does middleware, where does tagging fits here? Something like weather has data, fundamentally. I know weather affects us, but in this context, weather is data. How does IoT fit into smarter buildings? Right? IoT is a system. How does physical security fit? They're all systems. Right? So we're starting to sort of put different things different categories of products in different layers. And we have over there, just to remind us how it was, the vertically integrated providers. Somebody asked, where does communication fit in this stack? And the answer is it doesn't, because it's actually all over the place. This is not a technology stack. Don't confuse this with the 7-layer model thing that we all know in the network world. Right? This is really about the business, the products and the technologies that all need to come together. So it's not a technology stack. So there are actually aspects of communications that are all the way up and down. One example, latency. Right? Latency is the key thing when we talk about the cloud and the edge, right? So if you have a purpose, in other words, if you have a specific need for a certain amount of latency, that is a purpose.
Okay.
Well,
I think a clear example is the data exchange layer, right? We know there's gateways out there. The gateways are needed and probably will be forever, but you can place it right where it needs. It's here to enable exchange. It doesn't do the higher level functions, but it's an essential part of enabling them, right? As is middleware when you're talking about a similar role for software applications that need a middle layer, right? Or brokers like for MQTT, protocol converters, et cetera. So again, we've seen that we can break down and put the different technologies in their rightful place to help people understand where it all fits.
it goes all the way down to this thing down there, conduit. Communications, you typically need to put it in conduit, especially when there's environmental or security concerns. That is a physical physical thing, right? It impacts lots of other things. Antennas, Cat5, etc. They're all physical aspects. The other way of looking at it, the other question that we asked for is cybersecurity. So here's a cybersecurity stack. You want to talk about that, Jim?
Sure. So if you look at cybersecurity across the entire stack, it's a cross-cutting issue. So it goes across all the different levels. Well, what's involved with cybersecurity for building automation? A very complex topic right now. Starting with how building owners configure, occupy, roll out cybersecurity, all the way down to the technologies we're working on. For instance, BACnet Secure Connect and AHR, and some of the new technologies that are coming out around that, which you'll start seeing over the course of the next few years. But security, and I think this leads to other pillars that we'll get into with the smarter stack, it's a cross-cutting issue, but it's one that all these different layers and all these different disciplines touch. And because of that, we need to effectively stand it out. And if you look at the different diagrams, you can see, starting with purpose, operation, with things like defense in depth and zero trust, which are concepts that the military is requiring right now. Security policies, two-factor authentication when it comes down to operation, islanding, penetration testing. So we can go on and on, all the way down to hardware levels where we're dealing with firewalls, keys, how we can handle and distribute security keys. In this modern regime, every variable air volume box is going to have a security key. What happens when the facilities guy has to come in and service that VAV box? Does he have to go to the IT guy to get a new key? All of these things have to be worked out in the industry. And what we're using here in terms of the smarter stack is we're trying to come up with a way to simplify it and break it down so that those things could be understood and distributed across all the stakeholders at the different levels that need to work with them.
Okay. Thank you. So the other way of looking at it is to use the smarter stack to encapsulate the requirement. Right? So this is a fictitious high school, right, where imagine yourself sitting across the table with a engineer from a school district or something, and he or she is communicating what they're trying to do to make their schools smarter, right? So the question is, what is it that you want? What are the purposes? Scheduling, they need scheduling, they need comfort, social, critical safety, those kinds of things. All right, okay, great. How do you intend to operate this school? All right. They would like a school dashboard. Thank you. Okay. It's an operational thing. They have an HVAC engineer. Great. Put it up there. They want CCTV monitoring. They want energy dashboard, etc. Okay. How does all of this get delivered to the school? They have a managed service provider that they would like to use. Okay. They do have a local HVAC vendor that they also want to use. What do they want to do? The apps. The sort of exchange level. This is probably more of a conversation. They want to do there's some integration, there's some DER, aggregation, distributed energy resources. Where's the data going to be, etc. What are the systems they're focused on? And what are the actual physical buildings? So you can get a lot of information out of this very simple framework. Perspective is important with this stack. And it's important to spend a couple of minutes just talking about it, because when you look at the stack, it kind of looks really simple and it's very useful to communicate. But depending on who you are or who you're talking to, you have to be sort of sensitive to the perspective. A building owner is really going to look at the stack from the top, right? They're up here. This is the building owner, right? They may care about the operations, but they probably don't care too much about what's below. They have their objectives, and that's fine. An integrator will look at it from the delivery layer. Somebody who's focused on data will be looking at it on the data layer. Right, so you want to add to that?
Yeah, well, hopefully what we're seeing now is we've shown three different instances of how we're using the stack. One, from how do you place products and what they do, and apps and what. How do you put what the goals of an end user are and it maps on? And then how do you put the roles of the different players that implement projects or run the facilities, and it maps as well. So now we found this framework or this tool is useful in helping to break down, again, multiple problems around getting to intelligent buildings.
I'm going to skip this one. This is just different types of technology where they fit. IP goes up and down. Where does MQTT fit? It's kind of to do with the applications and data, how you get data to the application. Haystack is there. BACnet is predominantly in the system level. I'm going to skip this. This is too much stuff. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show one actual example that's actually done by Pete Scanlon, who's also part of the coalition. And do you want to tell the story about this project a little bit? Do you want to do this, Rick?
I'll let you talk about how it applies to the stack, but going back about 3 or 4 years ago, the city of Kansas City was contemplating doing a new fire station, the first one they'd ever built, and they brought me in as a consultant they wanted it to be the smartest fire station that had ever been built. And we didn't have much to go by to try and deliver what would be the smartest fire station, and indoor air quality and system interoperability and all those things are goals. But we borrowed some stuff from Scott Cochran about Division 25, and we created a framework of a spec for all the components that go into this fire station. If they can communicate, they should communicate, and if they can communicate, they should communicate on one of these sort of protocols, delivering data in one of these sort of ways. Very rudimentary, trying to just say to all the different contractors and the stakeholders, if it can communicate, it should. And if it has a port for a wire, let's figure out if we can get some data out of it. But what the fire station ended up with is a whole bunch of interoperable systems and a lot of data that we're actually collecting in real time. Is it perfect? No, there's still water heaters that are not connected and they have a little Wi-Fi connector right on there. Is there other data that we need to be able to gather? Sure. But that's sort of the background of what was the Fire Station 15 in Kansas City.
So this is the original document or a variation of that, right, from back there. So what Pete did was actually said, okay, take that, let's see how that fits on the stack, right? So this thing is quite slow, so I'm actually going to build it all out.
Very weird. Oh, that's over the internet, what you're seeing on this projector.
The internet's. Okay, so I'm actually going to build it all out. Right, so I don't have that problem. So this is what Pete did, right? These are the 3 goals that the fire station had. It's actually on the previous slide, the same thing. They healthy door, and they actually had a thing to do with water usage, which is great. These are the physical entities, not only the fire station, but different sort of parts of that. You can't read this, but these are all the different types of systems, HVAC, what is that? Electrical, water systems, etc. They use Voltron as the sort of the data exchange, data gathering and exchange. They use 75F for the controls, so that box here. And they have an EMIS, Energy Management Information System. So that's just an example of taking a project, in this case, retrospectively. So, do we get back to the coalition?
Yeah.
I think that's a good.
But, I thought that would provide context as you get into the 5 pillars, and the pillars, if you're going to talk about interoperability, you're going to talk about analytics, you're going to talk about specifying these systems, the Smarter Stack became a tool in doing that. And so now you get to the goal of setting up or getting people together for another coalition to address these different pillars of action that we wanted to help industry move forward with. And so a bunch of people came together and said, let's put the effort in to try to put a coalition together, bring people together, create a structure, create a 501c, create all of the documentation to support that. And along the way, we had some opportunities to actually start conveying this information to the White House in one case, right, and others. And all of this ability or the work we've done to break things down became really instrumental. So as I just said, it's not a lobbyist, but it's certainly, we want to be an information exchange. We want to be a resource of expertise as administrations try to influence the built environment to be more efficient, more carbon neutral, and all types of other goals, especially one of the key ones is around workforce, which is something that had come up numerous times in our Monday Live sessions and I know a number of people here, it's hard to find people. You were talking about this in the earlier session, right? How do we bring people in? So all of these pillars are really equally important, but some people only care about, one pillar or the other at a time. But the coalition's goal is to focus on all of them and try to bring information, exchange, input, consultative input into achieving these types of goals and do it around an organization that has a better ability to communicate.
Great.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe there was a band coming in. It sounded like a beat there. And it was important to be independent, right? There's lots of manufacturers who are trying to do good work to not only sell their product, but get their stories and education out there. But having a completely neutral organization that has members from competitive companies, has a different weight and conveys a different message that we're all coming together to try to help the industry.
Great. Can you speak to the?
Yeah, there was like a chicken or egg thing going on with some of the policymakers and industry or leadership at different levels of primarily in the administration. So we'll just start with that because Anto mentioned the kind of the DC based side of what we're trying to do. And there was this desire to have a lot more smart buildings. because everybody understands that smart buildings are more efficient. Smart buildings can be more sustainable, be better places to work and play. So there's a desire to have a lot more, a lot sooner. But who is going to provide the leadership of how to actually do that? And that's where it's like, well, these guys and these guys can be the leaders that put together the frameworks for how we accomplish that. And so we did, as you've heard a little bit about, we were able to put together some, through some contacts we had, meetings with Department of Energy, different policymakers in DC, the White House, and get feedback kind of in a two-way conversation. Just say, hey, we could provide leadership around some of these things. Is this in line with what you're thinking? And the feedback was all really, really positive. So the 501c3 allows us to have nonprofit status, which as a representative of multiple vendors of multiple companies, that gets seen in Washington, D.C. and different state houses and different mayors and even superintendents of schools as a powerful way to bring together multiple voices instead of just one company. And so as the coalition moved forward as these baby steps, we were confirming all along the way that these were the areas of leadership that were needed. And if we could make it simple and provide what we're going to maybe talk about in the next few steps, like templates for how workforce development works, or what does analytics mean? How do I buy analytics? How do I make sure I'm getting an interoperable building like what the fire station was intended to be? So providing leadership, turns out that that's what these policymakers wanted to be able to show. And when we say policymakers, I'm talking about sometimes it's government officials, sometimes it's school superintendents, but they're all using themselves as role models for how the community at large can move forward. Not just my schools, but how do I use my schools as models for what can happen in the rest of my community? So that's some of the additional background. But so we had maybe there were 7, and we zeroed in on 5. I'm using that kind of as an example. This is what they really were craving in terms of leadership. And we're going to talk about how you all help weave into this, hopefully as well.
And one of the angles, Rick, is that having a consistent message and consistent tools for governments, federal, state, and local, and for the industry, and for the channel that deliver it, that's a core part of what you were sort of saying was actually needed in the coalition.
Right, having a framework that is not based around a single vendor. So you may know I worked for a local company called Johnson Controls for 10 years and 6 days, a while ago, and as much, that's where some of the government affairs experience came in, but all the great ideas that a single vendor has, with all the best of intent, gets seen differently than a framework for multiple vendors to be able to play in. Does that make sense? It's like, so creating this framework where multiple vendors can play, and especially some of the smaller emerging ones who have some of the most exciting things to offer, creating a framework where the big guys can still play. I see the Johnson Controls guys, but also where some of the smaller companies can play. That really is a very important part of what then allows policymakers and even in the private sector to be able to kind of get behind the concept of moving the industry forward in a big, fast way.
But Melissa, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just pull up the workforce slides. So the big elephant in the room is who's going to do all of this great work. All right, now raise your hand in here if you're concerned about your current workforce. Do you have persistent vacancies right now on your team? Okay, and if you're concerned about 5 years from now, raise your hand. All right, there's a lot of gray hair in this room, myself included. I just pay a lot to cover it up. And the issue is that what are we doing about that? And it was a problem in 2020. You know, when we all met in Orlando, we were already concerned about it then, but enter the pandemic and enter all of the challenges that we're having now with the Great Resignation and other things. What are we going to do to accelerate? And if you go back one slide onto the mission of our workforce efforts, well, I guess I didn't get it in there, all right. But the mission of our workforce efforts is to accelerate the rate of smart building adoption by solving the root problems. Now, we know that to be able to do that, we have to solve problems at scale. And there are a lot of different efforts around this country, excellent efforts where people are doing a lot of good work in the area of workforce development. But if we as an industry are going to make a dent in the issues that are affecting our own companies, we had to have broader solutions. And so when John gets up and talks about Project Haystack and the importance of the work that they're doing, we tend to think about those things technically. But what are the specifications for the workforce that we in our industry need? How many people do we need in these roles? What do they need to know? What do they need to be taught? And what will they need to know 2 years from now when we already know that the average lifespan of technical skills is 2.5 years? And we're competing today with all kinds of industries. If you have good people on your team, don't worry, there's a recruiter near you trying to get them. So how are we going to solve these industry problems? One of the things that we have done is, as a committee and as a group of people across the industry, we have come through to actually define the job codes. For the first time in our industry, we actually have the metrics through work with the Department of Labor and the Department of Education. We know what the job codes are. So if you turn to the next slide and we start thinking about Division 25. Yeah, we'll go back up where we were, sorry. The one where the stack, the stack. Yeah, there we go. So we have the issue of, okay, this is great work, team. All right, so now we want to actually execute a Division 25 spec. Who is the question? So we talked about the why, we've talked about the what, but who are the people that need to do this work? And what are the barriers to being able to get the work done if there are vacancies on the team members in there? So we know that traditionally, when we look at the work, over the years, I started my career in the late 80s. Yes, that's how old I am, all right? But in the late 80s, it was all controls technicians that were plucked out of mechanical roles or electrical roles. They were given a few software skills. That's what we're calling that lower level that is controls technicians. And now we have a new layer of skill where we've got to be able to hire aggressively and creatively from the automation specialist role. And those are different. And we need to be able to, we need to bring people in from all over. And those blue categories, that's what we're calling integration specialists, that we need to be able to find people that have those sets of skills. And I had a slide that had the actual names of the roles in there. And in our session today at 4:45, we're going to be talking a deep dive of what is the data that we have on our workforce. What have we learned over the past few years about the characteristics, the makeup, the tags, the things that we know about our workforce that we proactively need to invest in solving our industry's problems. But when we talk about cybersecurity a few minutes ago, Jim's excellent point that you have to have knowledge up and down the stack. Who is that person that's going to possess that knowledge? Where do they come from? How do I hire them? What is the training that they need to have? Who is it that's going to provide that training? And so by creating this, one of the things that we've been able to do for the very first time in our industry, we now have an apprenticeship program for our industry. It is called the Emerging Technology Apprenticeship Program. It is being registered with the Federal Department of Labor. It is an IT-based apprenticeship that is designed for professional level roles. It is different than apprenticeships that you might know of. It is following the model of the healthcare and biotechnology and IT industry. Most people don't realize that the fastest growing apprenticeships in the United States today are IT-based apprenticeships. And they are among the most successful recruiting magnets in the country today, helping the big tech companies recruit because of the features that they provide. And there are tremendous benefits for that we'll talk about in other sessions this week. But when we look at that from the standpoint of the coalition, just like Rick said, That's more than one company. There are things that unite every single one of us, no matter what vertical you work in, no matter what software you work in. So when we think about workforce development from the coalition's perspective, we have defined a specification, we've clarified the jobs, we've gotten job codes, we've established a national apprenticeship for these higher level roles, and we actually have people enrolling in them throughout the country, and they're being used as recruiting tools with local colleges in every state. So if you want more information about that, you can reach out to me. We would love to have you involved in our committee. We have a lot of active work going on in that area. There's a lot of stuff to talk about today, but please reach out. There's a survey in there. We would love to get you involved in what we're doing and collect your feedback and get you involved to help you change the game.
Well said.
Nice.
Thanks.
So I'll leave this up once we finish our presentation so that you can get that QR code. Before that, just on this list, on this 5 pillars of action, we'll talk about interoperability and analytics and specs in a minute. And we've already talked about workforce. I kind of want to touch on the financial model thing. And I'm going to ask, because he does a fantastic job.
Yeah, I think it's flipped up. Everybody hear me all right? Yeah. So, let's ask a couple of basic questions. If you look at the Smarter Stack and you look at how it's laid out according to Division 2525. Well, what is that? That's part of the Construction Specification Institute, and that's how we've built and designed buildings for 100 years, with basically a low bid process of designing and building buildings. Well, let's ask a couple of questions over time. If we're looking at all this technical complexity and how that overlays, and when this building was built, I'm in an 1880s mill building in New Hampshire. How many people contemplated what the cybersecurity requirements would be of that building when it was built? How many people contemplated how quickly technology would change? And fundamentally, we are at a place where IT technology is changing over at 3-year intervals, and building automation is still lasting 30 years. Well, let's ask some basic questions here. What is the financial model by which buildings are built? Buildings are fundamentally bonds, right? The only time capital enters is when it's built and when it's renovated. Other than that, you're supposed to minimize all the costs, right? And so the entire financial structure of the world and the whole industries that we work for are predicated on financial models where money is only available on a project basis. But what happens when we get into things that are not projects anymore? They're processes. Cybersecurity is a poster child for this. Where is the money going to come from to pay for cybersecurity? It certainly wasn't contemplated in that pro forma or when the board of directors approved that building to be built. It's not there. And that's one of the reasons we're looking at some kind of transformative methodology for our industry to say, hey, there are a lot of things that are going to change. And the only thing that we can be certain of in the future is that this kind of change is constant. Change with technology, change with security. And what we need is really a new financial model. So some of you might be surprised. I've been in the analytics business for about 20 years now, and we have a lot of federal clients. And people always ask me, well, why isn't there more analytics adoption in the federal government? You know what the energy budget is for the Department of Health and Human Services and the federal government for energy efficiency? It's zero. Why is it that it's zero? The answer is that it's not that they don't do energy efficiency, but it all has to be wrapped into performance contracts. And we're at a point now where a lot of these performance contracts were predicated on lighting retrofits. And now since we've changed the last light bulb and made it LED, the wheels are beginning to come off of those financial models. We can't fund all energy efficiency in our government by changing light bulbs. But the question is, why do we have to be embarrassed about spending money on energy efficiency? Something that we should want as a society. It's got payback not only in terms of carbon, but any other methodology. But ask yourself the question, where does the money come from? It is not in any of the budgets. And why do they use performance contracting? because they can effectively steal money from the utility bill budgets, which is off balance sheet, which doesn't have to be appropriated by Congress to pay for these things. And that's fundamentally the kind of thing we're fishing for in the coalition, is can we get in there and can we get to these decision makers in Washington and say, hey, you know, at least using the federal government in a leadership position, can we have a reset? Can we not be embarrassed to spend money on places where we need it? You know, if the Russians are attacking our cybersecurity, we're not going to fund it because, you know, it has traditionally competed with a new roof for the building. So right now we're working to hopefully convene people through the Department of Energy, the White House and others to get to the root of the problem. Of course, what's the root of the problem? Accountants, right? So if we actually can talk to the American Institute for Certified Public Accountants, who by the way has a sustainability group, and get them to help, you know, work across lines that we haven't crossed before to start really investigating the root the fundamental causes of why there's no money to affect changes in these areas. That's enough talking, sorry.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we've done that. So let's jump into what we call Div 2525. I think you've all heard of, you know what Division 25 is all about, right? It's all about bringing all of the different systems together in a building, in a smart building. It's been around since about 2004, I believe it is, when they rejigged the division numbers. And there are obviously some specs out there. People have created specs, typically proprietary or typically vendor-centric or typically very focused. But it really is, I don't know how to describe it. It's not sort of, it doesn't feel up to date. It doesn't feel right in terms of the disconnect between what Division 25 specs are compared to where we are in technology. So, and we've all heard about, you know, the desire of having a really good Division 25 spec. So we said, okay, we'll tackle this because we're fools, I guess.
That's right. Well, I think that it's safe to say technology has just been moving faster than the ability for the consulting engineering community and our whole ecosystem overall to keep up with it. And what we're trying to do with the stack and with Division 2525 is a reset so that we can standardize on how we boil that complexity down.
And another way, you know, another viewpoint I'd offer on it is, great, you found an owner who wants to do this. He goes, how would I get it spec'd? Because the current spec tools don't embrace the current technology that's available and the current challenges that have emerged since it was published, cybersecurity, all of those types of things. So we said, sounds like there's a need for a new set of specifications. And again, under our goal of multi-vendor, you know, not proprietary in any way, something that you could really go to an owner and say, this is vendor neutral, but it addresses these new challenges that aren't embraced in the 20-year-old Division 25. So that's why we were crazy enough to embark on trying to write a complete stack of specifications called Division 2525.
And why is it called Division 2525 when it's actually Division 25? Well, we think that what we're trying to do is to create specs so good that you have to name it twice. You know? So that's just the name. Anyway, so because we have this, because we have the stack, when we started doing this, we were talking in the Mandalay group, and we kind of said, you know, we have the stack. That's kind of our framework for everything else, how we talk about systems. Why can't we use this as the framework for the Division 2525? And that's what we've done. I know it's difficult to read, but basically what we've done is we've taken the Division 25, if you know how the CSI spec work, they all have numbers. The first two is basically the division number, and then there's a section number, and then 2 digits on the, I don't know what they call that. But basically we said, okay, so there's a Division 252500, which we want to call Master System Interoperability. Right? So we're using the word interoperability instead of integration. And that's actually key because we know because of things like BACnet and other standards, Modbus and the standards that we have in our sort of homes and phones and things, that interoperability allows different things to work with each other naturally. You don't have to integrate them.
Yeah, I want to comment on this because I found it pretty much an aha moment. We've been doing systems integration for a couple of decades, but usually that means I'm going to connect this to this. I'm going to integrate those two, right? And they said, well, I'm making it interoperable. But the difference here, the viewpoint we're trying to get, I'm trying to make this system interoperable for whatever somebody might want to do with it in the future, because again, technology is changing. So that's why we do not use the word integration, which feels much more like a point-to-point on a project, done, signed off, walk out the door. Interoperable means these systems are going to be able to work with whatever comes down the pike.
And so using the stack, the way you sort of think about it is, we know there's going to be data in that building related to that building, right? So what we really want to do is to make sure that the specification of how that data is governed and managed and everything else has to be done in such a way so that any application, different layer, right, can talk to it. So it's interoperable. Right? That's kind of the vision, and obviously it goes the same all the way up and down the stack.
Yeah, even starting at a concept that, I don't know, maybe, I guess, there are divisions, there are a purpose or a goal, but that was actually one of the things we assigned ourselves. Okay, what is the purpose of this interoperability, right? We all hear all about all the examples talked about, but how can we express that in a way that an owner could take this forward and put it out as a specification? I want to accomplish these goals around interoperability, right? So,
same for the operations, right?
Right, what they want to do to be able to operate. Right?
So that if you're down there, the fact that you would know how the specification of how it's going to be operated, you should know about that. Right. Otherwise, you're not really able to deliver the right things. We started on this division 2525, and there are quite a number of areas, obviously, as we've seen here. The two areas that I think we should speak about a little bit is actually the analytics and the cybersecurity. So maybe, I mean, you two are kind of the analytics guys.
Well, we got this far with the stack, and we decided that we had to try it out and try something real. John and I have been friends and competitors at everything we've tried for the last 30 years. And as John points out to me frequently, our biggest problem isn't each other, it's competition, that we've really never had to mud wrestle one another for customers. The problem is defining what analytics is, right? So I've been in the business for 20 years, and here we have a lot of sophisticated companies, and then we have 70 companies entering the market that don't really know what the game is. Everyone that can put a meter on a screen is suddenly in the analytics business. Then you get to the point where there's so much complexity there that the customers can't figure out what to buy, how to spec it. The consulting engineering community doesn't have any idea what it is or how to spec it broadly. So we decided, let's get together and create the first open analytics spec. So John, at this point, took the spec that he uses to sell Sky Foundry, his product, and he sanitized it somewhat, and he threw it over the wall to me, and then our team sanitized it, and we came up with minimum criteria that we felt that were reasonable for people to be in this business. And we created a spec around that. John? And
I think one of the key things, I'd be happy to have this in a job that our channel is going to, and you'd be happy to, right?
Exactly.
That means we achieve, we believe, neutrality and a clear definition of the things analytics should embrace, embody, and accomplish for a building owner, right? And, so that was one of the first places where we came together and proved out this multi-vendor, let's get to a neutral, useful document that a building owner can use.
I want to add something to it. So you take this great work, all right, that these guys are doing, but now you need to have a conversation with the School of Engineering about what should be taught with people that are in engineering school today so that they can contribute to these projects. I sit on advisory boards in different schools around the country. And how do you explain systems integration when the curriculum has been so fixed for so long? The education system is a slow-moving actuator. So by doing these types of projects, it is also something that John said in his session earlier about how important the data is becoming to ESG perspectives from a corporate ownership. But the data is also our greatest selling advantage in being able to connect with new generations, because it's where we're able to say, this is what we're doing. These are the problems that we're solving. This is why we're such cool people to come join us, be a part of what we're doing. But this gives a language to be able to explain what should be taught and what people should know how to do.
I got an anecdote I have to throw out. This is a true story. I got invited to speak to an engineering school about, smart buildings, intelligent buildings. Hey, I'd love to do that one up. This was at college, and it was in the School of Architecture. And the attraction, well, I don't think it was me, it was pizza. But anyways, it was an evening session and the room's full. And, I spent time in the building beforehand, and there's all these are architecture students. And so there's all the models and the, and the treaties they did and all, like this fantastic building. So we get in there talking about, and I said, time out. Okay, what types of buildings you focused on, high rise? Okay, how many of you taken these types of courses in architecture? All the hands. How many have ever taken a courses in control systems? Crickets. And I said, they're going to destroy your buildings if you don't understand control, right? Because that's what makes a building run well or not. We all see these designs, net zero, all of this stuff. That's great. And if you accomplish the controls in accordance with that, you'll get there. But if you don't, you won't. And to me, it was a real reminder that there's missing elements of these people. These people are going to graduate and be out designing buildings. And they hadn't learned through their curricula the impact that these systems have and whether those buildings will perform. And it may be obvious, but to me, it was kind of stunning.
We love LEED Platinum buildings for that reason, John.
You make a living on them, right, yeah, absolutely.
It's a gold mine.
Exactly.
Just to his point, and a lot of you may be at a reception or something when our session comes up at 4:45. I don't even know what time it is, but we actually have a picture to demonstrate exactly what he said. So use these videos that have been recorded, all the hard work that Scott and his team are recording sessions. Look for the session that's solving skilled labor problems for our industry, because we have a picture. We took graduate engineers coming in and we asked them, how well do you understand mechanical science? How well do you understand comfort science? And you've got strong numbers on there. And then you start asking specific questions about these topics and the colors change dramatically. And what they actually are what they're able to do when they come in and what they have an appetite to learn, it gives them a real clear roadmap.
Can you talk about the cybersecurity?
Yeah.
I don't see.
Sure. So we're working on a series of standards here. The analytics standard that John started and we finished was basically the first thing we tried. We're also working on energy information systems, measurement verification, things to get into this kind of financial tie-in. But one of the key pillars is that cybersecurity piece, which is cross-cutting. So another former president of Tritium, who's not here today, Steve Fay, has been spearheading that initiative. And basically what he's done is he's created an open systems security spec, which deals with all of these operational cross-cutting issues. The kind of place that I would be contributing is down around BACnet Secure Connect and more of these physical levels. But Steve has taken and looked at the NIST cybersecurity framework and parsed out all the components. And, as once again, the consulting community has no idea what we're talking about now for the most part. It's a great place to start educating your consulting engineers, your contractors. And one of the key things is where is this going to be driven from? Is it going to be driven from the consulting community? We don't think so. we think that sophisticated owners are going to grab onto this technology and push it down. But those are the kinds of processes we're working on, and we're looking for help and volunteers and anyone that wants to join in and write and review these specifications. But I think they're going to be very important to setting a framework for how we deal with the complexity of what we're facing in the future. Intel.
Yeah. And you know, one thing that's really good about all of this, the smarter stack, the Div 2525, our aim is to put it out in the public domain, make it all open source. Right, so once we finish, you've seen the timeline that I showed earlier, once we finish it, or get to the point where it's usable, it will be made available to everybody to use. So that's a big deal, considering that we've not had anything like that.
And it's, you know, once again, these are our minimum specifications. I still want to compete with John. He's going to have value added in areas and go after markets that I'm not interested in. I'm going to go after markets he's not interested in. We might compete directly on features, but those are there. But at least we're going to have this base level of understanding of what it is that we're doing. And that's really hard today. You know, you could define cybersecurity many different ways, or analytics. And if we at least have a common understanding of what we're talking about, it'll cut a lot of the noise off, and we hope will, selfishly help the adoption of these technologies in the market.
Well, and add confidence to the owners who are trying to spec these systems, right? If they can go to, published and recognized and behind, with a consortium behind it, then they're going to feel more comfortable. I have some friends and acquaintances involved in property management, right? And, these people don't know all of these things. And John, we want to get going with digital transformation. Where do we go? Well, you can go to a vendor who's going to give you one vendor specific view, or could there be a whole set of specifications that they could draw from?
We had a question back here.
We work in the federal space, Department of Defense a lot, and I don't know if it's a coincidence or an overlap, but we work with specifications in Division 25, like 250811 is risk management framework. Is that something you guys are aware of, or is this the, like I said, an overlap, or is this same addition?
We're certainly aware of risk management framework for the military. I would consider that a subspecialty to, so if you want to have a conversation on that offline, we're happy to. This particular body of work gives a nod to those areas, but I would say that the military cybersecurity is its own discipline, and happy to talk to you about how that fits in. Sure.
And just in a general sense, our goal is to get specifications around the stuff that doesn't have it, right? While there's 25 for low voltage systems, it isn't addressing interoperability and data exchange and data governance.
25 spec.
Yeah, well, we're trying to follow the model so that it can be consumable by the people who use those specs, and maybe down the road it goes there, right, and gets embraced. But if we didn't follow the model, then, how as an engineer we're going to talk to even, follow what we've trying to done and relate to it. That's why we followed that whole functional model. Scott?
On your stack, and you mentioned vendor, no specific vendor, but when you look at the specification stack, is there really enough competitive software at each layer to say that I'm not going to make this better? I mean, when you write the requirements, oftentimes I noticed when you try to leave it open, you're still speccing one software because there's no other software that can meet the requirements of what you're writing. And I'm just curious from your angle, not analytics, but just basic BAS stuff. Do we have enough horsepower to say that you could write good requirements and have it be open right now with what's available in the market?
I would say yes, but I would be very careful in saying that, a lot of solutions are vertically integrated. We have solutions that meet the whole stack, which came from one vendor before.
Right.
As we go through this complexity, we're seeing more and more vendors come in to satisfy these different layers. But I view that as a continuous process. And in the meantime, people might span several layers with the solution they have. I love Haystack and a lot of the work John's doing. I was in the analytics business 10 years before that started. So I have my own solutions to that. And I want to embrace John's solutions going forward. Does that make sense, Scott?
Oh, it does. I'm just saying, like, when it comes to actual building controls, we don't have a lot of options for software.
Yeah.
Not to make it actually work, not when you want to make it interoperable and all those other things.
Yeah.
We're really limited in what software we can implement to accomplish that. And I get choice. We believe in choice as a distributor, but I'm just asking you guys, do you really have the horsepower out there?
I would say that, so far with the ones we've attacked, we think there's enough, there's an important area for commonality of essential functionality that shouldn't be, debatable, right?
Right.
Now, whether that would include everything you think needs to be embraced to solve one of your customers' problem, maybe it doesn't, but it's still a base. If it doesn't have that, then it certainly can't meet the customer's requirement. And that's really where we're trying to come. Let's clarify this so people who are trying to make digital transformation and embrace the increasingly IoT interoperable options out there have something to work from other than manufacturer's claims.
It just seems like our vendors don't design anything around this.
Well, I think that's right, because in a way, we've been thinking about vertically integrated solution, right? So there's really not been much of a motivation for somebody to just create that piece, right? Our thinking is that by creating this framework, the stack, and then the specification would actually motivate somebody to just focus on one thing, rather than trying to build a stack. Because if typically you as a company, you're very good at something. If you're a vendor, you develop technology, you're very good at something, right? And then you suddenly realize you actually need the full stack, right? So you have to do all of that work, right? That's not really your cup of tea, right? Because that's the only way you can do it in the past, right? So with this sort of philosophy, you can just focus on that. Other people will focus on different things. And
another point, I'm putting this in the public domain, so you can say, well, this is a good base, but I need to add the other, 20%, fine, right? We're trying to create something that'll help solve this confusion, and maybe not the right word, but this huge expanse of technologies, and help clarify and organize it. Doesn't mean you can't go beyond that, right?
And I think it's important to make sure that we're not saying that it's a bad idea to spec around something. I think it's just making the decisions and the gaps more clear. Because especially today, when there's so many different types of technology and so many different products out there, a lot of times, depending on who it is, has a hard time knowing where that thing fits. And it certainly would be an empowering tool for someone that has answers in many of the areas and has confidence in it. So it's not that it's a bad thing to spec around one vendor, it's just making sure that we're looking at where the gaps are.
I just want to mention one thing on this concept of a project template. One of the motivations for the Smarter Stack and the 2525 and a lot of the coalition is to actually do a lot more, make a lot more buildings smarter, right? Out of the 5 million buildings in the US, it's somewhere like 3% has smarts in it. Maybe it's 5%, whatever it is, right? And so there's like this huge amount of potential for us. They're obviously in smaller buildings, right? And that actually requires, so to tackle that, we need scale. The key word there is scale, right? One of the coalition meetings, I did a little calculation in my head. If we're only to attack 20% of the buildings in the US, that's 1 million buildings. I can't remember all the numbers, but 1 million buildings, right? Let's say we want to do that in 5 years. That's 200,000 buildings a year, right? How many is that a day?
1,000.
800, right? Do we think as an industry we can do 800 buildings a day?
Not without Melissa.
Right.
A whole lot of other people.
No, it's keep point.
So we need to scale all of this, right? So it can be done really, really easily. Interoperability is a key part of that. All of the various functions are a key part of that. But also a key part of that is some kind of template so that we don't have to involve, sophisticated MSIs and sophisticated people to do those projects that really don't need that. So it can actually almost be to the ease, if that's the right word to use it, as sort of home automation and things like that. Maybe that's not a good comparison.
Another point I'd make, and Jim spoke about, trying to educate and influence a different way of financially justifying projects and accounting for projects, et cetera. If we're going to get to that point, there has to be specifications so people know what it is they're going to do a different financial model around. You're going to do what with that? We want to do this. So again, even if it becomes a base that would be extended, expanded upon, and even made in much greater detail for a specific project, we think it'll help the people who want to invest money, right, or create regulations or policies to move forward, because it's something they can point at that has some definition around it other than just vendor-generated content.
It'd be kind of good to find out if there are other questions in the group. I mean, they're really good.
We've kind of got to the end of our agenda, so I mean, we'd really love to open it up to questions.
But before we do that, I don't have the room number yet for.
Oh, yeah.
So just wonder.
Fancy walking around the flamingo this evening.
I also wanted to point out some of the other, again, we've obviously got a great partnership with Monday Live going, C4SB and Monday Live. And then recently the Building Intelligence Group with Brad and Mike. If you want to talk just a second about what BIG is, we'll let you do that for a second.
Yeah,
just
you should.
A second. But before the reason I stood up was to say, we're actually having a little networking event over at the Flamingo sometime this afternoon or evening. Don't know what room number it is yet, but stand by. Also, it gives me the opportunity to talk about the fact that we've got a LinkedIn page, and that's where the room number will be posted by our social media intern as soon as I can tell her what room number it is. But there's a networking event up at a big old suite in the Flamingo this afternoon. Brad, you want to spend a second to talk about what BIG is all about?
Sure. Thank you. I expect to get the honor today. So I'm Brad Colton. I'm out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Nice to get away during this time of year. And about 4 years ago or so, I started the Building Intelligence Group, just with a space that we had for meeting, and a bunch of people we called up and said, hey, we want to fill this gap where we got all these different groups that are talking about intelligent buildings. We got ASHRAE talking about it. We got Bixie talking about it. All these groups that are talking about it in silos, which is the antithesis of bringing all these people together and tearing those silos down. So just by having some refreshments and a space to meet, we were able to get this thing going, which has turned into monthly meetings, kind of back down to quarterly meetings during the pandemic. And Minneapolis 4 years ago, Chicago 3 years ago, and I think what we got right now, I call it proof of concept. And we're starting to scale this out. The pandemic has had a real impact on that. You really have to be able to meet in person to be able to get something going. But we've got 20 other cities where we have leaders that are going to start those groups here as soon as we're able to get some green lights and be able to reserve some spaces and be able to start meeting in person safely again. But what's been fun about this group is that we're seeing all the opportunity here that's complementary to what C4SB and Monday Live has been seeing, and looking at, okay, how can we work a little more deliberately to try and fill some of these gaps so we don't all have to do everything. We don't want to be competing with each other, that's for sure. And as we've been putting these local meetings together, C4SB said, oh great, that's one more thing we don't have to do. So I think as we keep moving forward, we want to be deliberate about how we're integrating and applying a lot of the best practices that we're getting from the stack and from intelligent buildings to try and help create something that's greater than the sum of the parts as we're all putting our different forces together. Thank you.
Great. Let's open up for questions. Before that, I want to mention one thing. We use the term smarter stack. We actually had a discussion for several weeks about this. And typically people talk about smart buildings, right? And there's two problems with that. A, we know it's very complex, right? So it's really difficult to do. And B, everybody has their own definition of what smart means, right? So we're asking people to do something very difficult, and we can't tell them what it is that we're asking them to do because everybody has different views, right? So the desire for smart buildings is really, really hard, and it's kind of really impossible. And just by turning the word to smarter changes that dynamics altogether, right? Because any one of us can go to a building, do something, install some technology or product, and it will be smarter tomorrow, right? We keep on doing that, obviously gets smarter and smarter. So it's a progression, it's a much more sort of, and it's also something you can achieve. So with that, really open it up for questions. No questions.
Oh, come on, somebody's got a question.
Or comments?
Yeah, doesn't that be a question?
You said you don't know where to source IT based, like, people for interoperability and stuff. I went to a school, and I'm on an advisory board in Pennsylvania, and they actually have that, like, a person that they're bringing forward. So there is a school that has that.
Yeah, it's excellent. And I'm actually familiar in the state of Pennsylvania right now. We're in the process of actually registering some things for employers in Pennsylvania. But there are schools all over the country, and they each are popping up in various places. I had the privilege several years back to found the first automation and controls program in the state of Florida, teaching a lab-based automation and controls curriculum. Others before us had gone and gotten the grant funding. We had $1 million to build a lab and, that kind of thing. The challenge is this, and if you hear anything I've said today, listen to what I'm about to say, all right? How many of you would be in business today if you had a 70% scrap rate? No hands, huh? This statistic is true across the country. Of those entering a 2 or 4 year program at an academic institution, there's a 30% chance that they will graduate within 5 years of the planned graduation date. Okay? If you're counting on schools to be able to deliver the volume that you need, in my home city of Orlando, Florida, I'm very proud of Orlando, Florida. We've done a lot of hard work in a lot of ways, but our little school had a need to deliver approximately 100 graduates. In order to do that, we had to have 700 people come in. If you're not going to graduate but a certain amount, and it's going to take 3 extra years to predict for it to be finished, how do you get to 90% promise dates? How do you get to the point where you can expect you're going to graduate 94% of the people that enter a program? And there's only one solution in our country that has shown consistently to work, and that is an apprenticeship model, because there are pay raises that are tied to completion. The average age of a self-paced program, the average completion rate is 10%, less than 10%. So it's just a challenge if we don't have something. So if they have a program in Pennsylvania, the cool thing is that because we have gone to such an effort to have an emerging technology program, a student from any program can bring their credentials and they can say, I've had these courses, and they can apply to the curriculum that we have. They can get credit for it, but then they still go into a program designed for the occupation that we need them to be able to do, that's going to build the smarter stack, and then be able to actually contribute and come out of the other end with a national credential. So the credentials coming out of these programs have either a Department of Education seal or Department of Labor seal. That's pretty valuable. It's currency for people that are entering our industry, but they're professional based, and it's a really cool opportunity.
What school?
Florida, Penn State, Pennsylvania College.
Yeah, familiar with the program up there. Yep, absolutely. We've talked to some of the professors and stuff up there about that. So that's great. That's an example. In fact, one of the exercises we did about a year ago was to try to track these down. They're out there, and some are very technician oriented, right? And as we look at the stack, we've got to solve all of these layers if we're going to get to this. But yeah, definitely heard of that. Yeah.
So applaud you guys for the stack and the clarity that it's brings. It's really fascinating. My question for you is, do you see the consulting engineer community maybe picking this up and running with it? Do you see it more of an end user owner type thing where they pick it up and running with it?
I think we see both, and outreach is, what we say, great when we have all the specs done, how are we going to get it out there? certainly get it to owners. I talk to owners who are looking, I may be talking to them about what I saw. They say, hey, I got a bigger problem. I got to solve this whole thing, right? Well, here's some tools to help you, right? And yeah, we followed the model of Division 25, so hopefully it makes sense to consulting engineers and they can see a way to bring it into their business. But we got to get the message out there.
Yeah, related to that is it seems like the specification here is more targeted toward the specifying engineer, right? So to get to the owner, from that spec, we've got to get to how owners can write project requirements and can understand how to write those. And they can become maybe a control intent narrative and then eventually become basis of design and parts of the spec. So there's more work to be done, but you got to start.
Yep.
Harold, can you please stand up and introduce yourself
Yeah.
and talk about the ASHRAE 90.1
Yeah.
for a second,
Yeah.
please?
That's
In fact, come grab the mic.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm involved with the ASHRAE.
Yeah, grab the mic. So we can.
All right. Have to unmask too.
Mhm.
I'm Harold Jepson. My background is lighting and lighting controls. And so I'm part of the ASHRAE 90.1 standard. And we just finished our meetings over at Caesars and I ran over here because a few weeks ago, I was able to get in contact with a few of these fellows who understood about the organization here. But there's studies out there and research out there that shows how building analytics can improve the efficiency of buildings. And so we've struggled with how do we write requirements around that to put inside the standard. So we reached out to Anto and to Jim and to John and had a little bit of a conference call so we can at least write some language that helps introduce it into the standard. And today, at least it passed to go out for ballot and public review is a new section that has like 32 different options, if you will, of energy efficiency measures that can be, my phone's going off and it's ringing in my hearing aid, sorry. I can listen to rock and roll, nobody knows it. And so, I saw when they presented the stack, it made all the sense in the world. I've been 25 years in building operations with lighting, but we're excited about the prospect that offers us to be able to define good things that can provide energy efficiency for buildings. So great.
That's
Okay.
excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
It's a really important comment.
So we were at a city in Kansas City, and remember when the person from Kansas City was presenting the fire station? I think it was at a Smart Cities conference. And he said at some point that he was hoping to deliver some kind of document. And there were people from at least 10 or 15 other cities, even a few from Canada, that were just like, oh my God, we want a copy of that. So it seems like there are types of buildings maybe that get repeated and maybe city governments, but Rick, can you speak to that? Is it literally that they were waiting for Division 2525, or is there another kind of document that was being referred to that would help?
It was, they were waiting for Division 2525. I guess that's the point that I think we got us launched was the market is ready for this leadership and for these documents that help them figure out how to buy it. And Tristan was describing a meeting that happened
3 years ago.
or 3-4 years ago.
But it shows the appetite for just
Right,
people
yeah.
who want to grab it and replicate. They're just hungry for it.
That, so to the point you made about the 87% of buildings, whatever the percentage of buildings are, the small ones that are overlooked. When we did have those meetings with the CEQ and the Department of Energy, they were, one of the things they said was analytics everywhere.
Yeah.
Not analytics for big, expensive buildings, which kind of goes right with the little saying that Tristan and I made up years ago, which is Internet of expensive things is interesting, but Internet of all things is what we need to be able to move this industry forward. And analytics everywhere is, so we have to be able to figure out how to scale. But that's what that entire audience of city managers, planners, and engineers was looking for was, how soon can I have that? And we've been getting everybody's input on how do we actually make a spec or a framework for a spec. I mean, that's the huge opportunity. So as Anto was saying, we need your involvement. The coalition is set up as a 501c3 nonprofit, multi-vendor. We started the work. Oh, the other thing I wanted to say is that there was this thing we learned from dealing with architects. Anybody an architect in here? They put specs on the street that are only 20% done. And that gets a project going. We've all worked in that world, right? So that's, right, it's kind of funny.
Well, we see control specs are only 5% done. So what's your point, Rick?
So the point is, we're not waiting for 100%.
Exactly, yeah.
We're not waiting for 100%.
Yeah.
We have enough of a framework that you can use. So yes, we need help with creating more of the specification, more of the workforce templates and all that. But we also want y'all to be involved in taking this back to your school districts and to your communities and to your consulting engineers and to all the contacts, your owners and everybody else you've got, and get feedback. And so it's kind of a two-way thing. And we're kind of creating some content that is ready for feedback. It's also ready for the track, if you will, close enough. It's not like you have to have the 100% of the documentation done before the plane takes off, which is actually a good idea. But in this case, we can actually start moving with things at, the 10, 5, or 20% level. So any other questions?
I was just curious, I came a little late, so I apologize, but I was curious if you could define a little more clearly the word interoperability. I'm confused a little bit by what you mean by that, your definition. And the reason I asked that is that I've been a mechanical engineer and designer and programmer for 23, this is the year 23 for me in the industry. And I've worked for large proprietary OEMs as well as Tritium-based systems. And so for me personally, as an account executive and sales and stuff like that, one of my biggest nightmares is to open up a 2300900 spec that says this system shall be an open system, an open protocol system. Because even in our industry, if I walked out on the floor right now and said, what is an open system? We'd have fist fights out in the parking lot. So when I hear the word interoperability with manufacturers, it sounds awesome, but what does that mean?
That's the goal of, right in the spec is to put language down, review it by multiple people who are involved, get feedback on it so that here is something that's meaningful that people can embrace, right?
But I think he's asking fundamentally what.
This is your wheelhouse, Anto. Why don't you?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Anton.
Interoperability is the inherent nature of a thing to be able to operate with other compatible things. Let's put it that way, right? So we have interoperability in our lives all the time. Email, right? I can email you if I knew your email address. We don't need to agree anything beforehand, right? I can send you to a URL of a website. That's interoperability. Right, and one of the difference of our approach of interoperability is that we're really talking about interoperability at the system level, right? We have interoperability at the field level, right? BACnet, Modbus, and other things, and you can actually plug them into each other and they will work, right? But at the system level, we don't have that, right? So what we end up having to do is to actually integrate them. And integrate is the word integrate is an action, right? You have to do something to integrate, right? Imagine if I had to integrate to your email system every time that you want to send an email to me. Ain't gonna work, right? So interoperability is sort of an inherent nature of things, and in our case, is the systems. And from the stack perspective, all of the systems up and down there.
I come from the IT world, and I think it's treated as being more interoperable. Are there metaphors from that spot that help? I certainly know I can grab switches and routers and all kinds of things and put them together like Lego bricks, and they're going to work. But is that at the hardware level, or is that a systems level?
Well, it depends on which particular one you're talking about. A switch is obviously at the protocol level of IP and Ethernet.
Well, but are there, is that a good model, and what is missing from what we have right now? And in particular, has he been reassured yet? Have you been reassured yet by our answer?
Well, it sounds cool, but the reality of it is that there's just like, I'm just speaking passively, there's brands out there that aren't gonna wanna play ball. So that's the problem. And I think once we have a fundamental shift in like how these systems are created and devised, then like, this is a nice conversation.
And that's the beauty of the stack, right? Because it actually starts to enable you to have a framework so you can actually understand all of the pieces that you actually want to be interoperable. Because without that, it's really very difficult. Can Jim's system interoperate with your system, assuming you have a system? I don't know, because I don't know what your system does.
If we had defined the capabilities in the stack, you'd be able to go, yeah, it looks like it would. You know, it's the funny thing about interoperability, you can really tell when you don't have it.
That's part of what I was going to say. And I compliment you on your question because you've asked it where it's real. And when you're trying to educate new people coming into the industry, you've got a wealth of experience. And it's hard to remember what you did not know the first day you didn't know it. But when you're trying to explain some of these concepts to others and define what would it take for something to be interoperable and for owners' requirements, does the owner want and expect and require something to be interoperable? And then are these elements, whether we call them elements or components, are they interoperable? So it's not that everything will always be interoperable and that we have the magic pixie dust, but it's at least defining the decision-making tools that should be used to be able to have that conversation and diagnose whether it is or is not. Does that help?
And I can say one more thing, which is that the owners that we talk to really want to be able to choose different pieces. Their facilities managers want to choose different pieces. They want to have more choices that feel interoperable. So they want it. So ideally, the goal of this coalition is to say, there's going to be a moment where there's some critical mass where the brands that don't play ball are losing because the owners really want brands that play ball, I think.
We'll well past the top of the hour, so we need to bring this to a close. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks.